Good afternoon. This is Lisa Ash from the math section of the K-12 Standards Curriculum and Instruction Department of DPI. I want to first do a sound check before we get started. So if you could, raise your hands to make sure that everybody can hear me. I want to make sure that everybody can hear me. All right, I see several hands going up. All right, before we get started, I want to first say welcome. We're going to talk today about the revised K-8 mathematics standards. I want to introduce a couple of folks that we have in the room. We have Joseph Reaper, who is a secondary math consultant. Well, I guess first you have me, Lisa Ash, who's a secondary math consultant. We have Denise Schultz, who is an elementary math consultant. And we also have Josh Griffin from our testing department. Towards the end, we are going to give everybody an opportunity to ask questions. We're going to try to answer as many questions as we can as we go through this or at the end of this. But if you have other questions that we don't get answered today, we're going to create an FAQ document that actually addresses as many questions as we don't capture today. So today, we're going to talk about the upcoming implementation of the K-8 revised math standards to be implemented in the 2018-19 school year. Our agenda is as follows. We're going to talk about the policy and process that we have in place for standards review. We're going to talk about new resources being created. We're going to talk about the current resources that we already have that are realigned to the new standards, and then we're going to give an opportunity for questions. So here is the policy and process delineating the standard course of study for curriculum development. It is a 6-step process, and we're going to go through several of these steps. What you'll note is that we do actually have an extra step within our process. So if you look at step 3 that talks about submitting the draft for public review and input, we actually added an extra step and sent our standards out for external review. And we'll talk about exactly how that process went as we go through. So the first step was the review of data and research, to review data and research, surveys, and other feedback. This process actually started back in the fall of 2014 and continued through December 2015 with a report of findings from the Academic Standards Review Commission, also known as the ASRC. The data that was included included surveys from educators and the public. We had focus groups of teachers from every region of the state and educational leaders within North Carolina. The data review teams were then assembled in November of 2016. It included K-12 teachers and teacher leaders representing every district of different sizes and areas of North Carolina. Also, math education professionals from North Carolina colleges and universities. Their job was to read all of the qualitative feedback from all of the data that we received, applying no opinions at that time. They were to read all of that data and then come up with common themes for the data. Once they came up with common themes, they then applied their professional judgment in small groups and created a list of recommendations for the writing teams. The second step was to establish writing teams and develop drafts of the proposed changes. So the writing teams actually met in December of 2016 here in Raleigh. They worked to apply the recommendations from the data review group, and they had their first draft ready in January of 2017. The groups worked differently. The first draft consisted of members, some were members of the data review team, and some people were outside of the process. And the reason for that was to make sure that we had all kinds of views represented. So people who were a part of, who read the feedback, and then others who had not read the feedback. K-5 started their work by grade level. 6-8 actually started their work by domain. Then we sent the data, the standards out, the first draft out to LEAs. Before we wanted to send it out to public, we actually wanted to use LEAs as an extension of the writing team. So we asked for LEAs to gather teachers in groups and submit one submission per LEA of their recommendations. We then got the writing teams back together. They combed through that data, and then we created a second draft. And that second draft was created in Greensboro in March of 2017. So here is some members of the writing team, and we want you to kind of listen to what they said about being part of the process.
Teachers, parents, community members, and the Academic Standards Review Commission provided valuable feedback on revising the kindergarten through grade 8 math standards. This feedback was then reviewed by math teachers, coaches, district leaders, and higher education partners. Let's listen to what a few of the participants had to say about the process.
We are here in Raleigh, North Carolina on day 2 of looking at the feedback provided from the Academic Standards Review Commission and all of the surveys done by community stakeholders, parents, teachers, and educational leaders looking at standard revision.
It's been an incredible process collaborating with other professionals from different levels, from elementary to middle, high school, college, professors, and having that chance to get different perspectives, read the reviews, and then reflect as educators.
I think one of the things that Natasha and I found yesterday morning, as we were in the same group looking at 5th grade feedback, was sort of leaving our biases at the door and looking at the feedback. And we spent 3.5 hours basically doing a qualitative thematic analysis on what were the themes in the surveys from community stakeholders and parents and teachers.
For me, this process has been very eye-opening. I can't wait to go back to my school to tell the teachers about the process itself.
We're looking at what are the teachers saying? And what are they wanting to have change? And then we're making suggestions for that. So as teachers, we can make that change. So taking the surveys is so important for them.
It's a whole room full of people from all across the state working together.
I've been working on the elementary standards. It's been really good being able to sit at a table with teachers and district leaders and universities, support staff from across our state to look at these standards and impact our students.
We had a chance to read all the comments that teachers and parents and community gathered, so we could compile those. Then with the people in our group, went to sort through, okay, well, using our professional judgment. I'm in a group with a classroom teacher, I've got a university professor, I have a curriculum coach at my group. So we're hearing from lots of different people. And
I feel empowered, a lot of us. And it's not just people sitting in a cubicle or in a hall creating these standards. It's actually teachers creating these standards.
So I felt that it was amazing to have the opportunity to voice your concerns, to voice also your expertise in the profession. But it was also good to hear from colleagues across the state and hear their concerns, and that those concerns do matter when we're educating our children in reference to mathematics. I also liked how it was tied into the vertical alignment between grade levels so that you can see how the standards should tie together nicely.
I think just looking at it from the perspective from the mountains to the coast and everywhere in between, from rural and urban.
The process has been very thoughtful, and it's one that I think teachers across our state, all educators, are going to be proud of. I think too that teachers will feel very supported by this process, that they will know that their voices have been heard.
I can go back to my district and say, look, this is the process, this is what we've done. They've heard from the teachers in the whole state of North Carolina, they've heard from the stakeholders in North Carolina, and I think this whole process has really given teachers a better understanding.
The end result of the Data Review Committee and the writing team is a final draft of North Carolina math standards for kindergarten through grade 8, written by North Carolina educators for the students of our state.
So one of the things that we really want to emphasize is that collaboration is a part of this. So this is not a situation where we at DPI sit here siloed and create standards, we really work with educators across the state to do this work. I understand that the video may have been a little bit grainy, but we are going to upload it on our PD and webinars page, and you will have a good quality of the video so that you can use it in your districts. So the next thing we want to talk about is some of that feedback that we got back. So remember, we said that before we sent out the feedback to the public, we wanted to gather some feedback from the LEAs. So here are some survey data, some quantitative data from our LEA feedback. 4 major areas that we talked about here were rigor, coherence, clarity, and measurability. And as you can see, for the most part, almost all of our districts responded. So in K2, we had 99 out of 115 districts that responded. In 3.5, we had 98 out of 115. And in 6.8, we had 94 out of 115. And we wanted to make sure that we had the vast majority of our districts represented so that when we looked at this feedback, we knew that we were getting representation from across the state. So the third step in our process is then to submit the draft for public review and input. So again, to reiterate, draft 1 went out to the LEAs for review. Then draft 2 was created from input, from that LEA input, and then it went out for public comment in April of 2017. So here is some data that we got back from the quantitative public feedback. 2 major themes there that we wanted to highlight were that the standards are clear and concise, and that the standards provide appropriate end-of-year expectations. And as you can see, when you look at the percent agree and strongly agree, we had a large amount, 80% or better in both categories, where the public felt like we actually did have clear standards and they were appropriate. Here's that step that I was talking about earlier. So we actually took the public input feedback and we created another draft, but then we took that draft and did external reviews. So Oklahoma, Minnesota, Kentucky, Utah, and Ohio are states that participated in our external review. The key thing about those states is that we had states that actually had adopted Common Core. We had states that did not adopt Common Core at all, and then we had states that had actually were former Common Core. So they had initially adopted Common Core and then moved away from it, just like North Carolina. So we took their feedback, and that's what we used to create our final draft that was then presented to the State Board of Education in June. Step 5 is to submit the standards to the State Board of Education for discussion and approval. That happened at their June State Board meeting. The Wednesday meeting, which was May 31st, draft 4 was presented for discussion, and along with a tentative implementation plan, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. And then on the next day, that Thursday, June the 1st, they actually voted to adopt the standards for implementation in the 2018-19 school year. The last step of our process reflects the professional development plan for educators. And this is where this really becomes important for our colleagues out here in the state. The red section represents the inputs, and the inputs actually are the collaboration, all the different resources and all the different educators across the state that are creating resources for the implementation of these standards. The processes reflect the face-to-face or virtual instances where we want to engage with you. So if you notice at the very top, you see summer and fall 2017 information sessions. We actually decided not to do face-to-face information sessions simply because we knew everybody was still teaching to the current standard course of study. We did not want to pull teachers out of their classrooms right now or away from their students if they're already teaching current standards. And we decided to do this webinar instead to let you know that things are coming. So we will have some spring face-to-face sessions. So look for that in the future. In the yellow section are simply our outcomes. These are the things that we hope result as the end of a successful implementation.
Good afternoon. This is Joe Reaper, and I'll be talking with you today about the new resources that are being created for this implementation. So first thing is we are going to have the math resource for instruction, and it's also known as the MRI documents. For those of you that are familiar with the high school, you're kind of familiar with these, and these will replace the unpacking documents that we have. They're currently under construction now at DPI, and the reason for this is we want them to align with the official interpretation of the standards, not what somebody thinks it should say, but what it actually means and how it should be officially interpreted. There will be a slightly differentiated format for each of the grade bands. So K-5 will look a little bit different than the middle school. So here's a look at just a quick glance at an elementary version of this. So you can see from the standard there, this is a 3rd grade example. And so in this you can see we have the domain cluster and the standard at the top. We have an emphasis on the vocabulary. And then we have instructional notes. So you can see here on the left-hand side, these are notes directly from the standards writers and that talk about what they meant by creating the standard, important things to look for, challenges that students may face. And you can see there on the right-hand side of that checking for student understanding, you see ways that teachers can formatively assess what is going on. Now, one thing I'll tell you, at the 2 examples we're seeing here, they're works in progress, so they are not done yet. So there will be more things coming along in these as well. Okay, and then at the middle school one, this is looking at a 6th grade example here. We can see we have the same kind of setup and format with the domain cluster and standard, but we have a little bit of a deeper dive into it. In the red box there, we have what we're looking at, coherence. So we're looking at what is important that came before and what does it connect to in the future. That vertical connection through middle school is one of those areas where we know is really, really important. So not just focusing just on 6th grade, but what are they learning as they move through all of middle school and what do they come up from elementary. In the blue section over there is a focus on the standards for mathematical practice, and you can also see that there is a vocabulary section in there as well. And just as you saw in the elementary section, right, on the left-hand side, down there in the green section, we have the instructional notes that, again, comes directly from the standards writers that point out some things that are important to know. Sometimes it says things that you need to do. Sometimes it says things that you need to avoid. And then what are some of the common challenges that you may find? And then again, on the right-hand side, how do you know students understand? And this is designed, and this is something really important here, these are designed for formative assessment and not EOG practice. All right, there's some additional sources that are being created out there as well. There's an instructional framework that will come in, it'll be packed within something similar to a pacing guide, but it is much more than just that. We'll see that in just a second. Some other things that are coming, some ways to communicate with parents about these standards, and research briefs. So what is it that are, as I told you, at Lisa was talking about, we work closely with our university partners. So what does research say? What's the best way to teach? What connections do we need to make? So some very important things, the connections to our university partners. We will have some PD modules that will be created. Those that are familiar with high school would be a little familiar with those. And resources coming from our MSPs. All right, now one of the things one of our key partners in creating these resources and collaborating across the state is NC2ML. And what we have here is a video that's going to kind of introduce NC2ML to you. Some of you may have seen a little bit about NC2ML before, but I think for a large majority of us out there, the NC2ML is this new group. So we're just going to kind of take a look and see who they are.
Collaboration is beneficial to teachers because it leverages the strengths of each individual for the benefit of all.
Collaboration is how we often deal with the most difficult problems that we face. Collaboration is important because it allows us as educators to collaborate around student achievement, which is the ultimate goal of education.
It shouldn't matter where a student in North Carolina is sitting, whether it be Asheville or Greensboro or Raleigh. They deserve the same opportunity to learn mathematics.
The North Carolina Collaborative for Mathematics Learning is a research practice partnership with the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, and universities and school districts across the state of North Carolina. The overarching goal of our partnership is to create a network where state and district math leaders, teachers, and teacher educators can come together to support mathematics education in our state. Let's take a brief look at some exciting resources and tools this partnership is co-designing to support mathematics education in North Carolina.
I really like the tasks and the modules because they provided me with real-world applications that are fun and engaging for the teacher and the students. They can be easily altered and adjusted to meet the needs of my learners. They also serve as good models from which I can attempt to create, plan, and deliver instructional tasks.
Computer work and discussions around the task are really nice to help me feel more confident and prepared as I introduce the new task to my students. Seeing how other teachers implemented the tasks and how they responded to student work is very helpful.
So when I look at the standards and compare what's going on in Unit 1 versus Unit 4,
I think the focus of the standard is for students to understand and come up with a mathematical justification.
That is a major part of Math 1, is to understand the difference between linear and exponential.
It is important that by creating this equity and access for teachers across the state of North Carolina, that every student is receiving high quality instruction in every single classroom.
While the Canvas space is designed to be a safe space for teachers to collaborate, content, pedagogy, and other briefs are being developed to support other stakeholders in the North Carolina mathematics education community, such as teacher leaders, coaches, administrators, and district level personnel.
Research-based, they're very professional in appearance. They're great because they speak to all of our clientele. They speak to teachers, they speak to parents, they speak to administration, they speak to district personnel, and I think that's really important. I think it's pretty phenomenal that one brief can accomplish all that.
I've used the research on student thinking to help me explain to my parents that when their students are struggling, I care, but that the struggling is extremely important for their learning process.
This helps to connect the researcher with the practitioner. And I think that that collaboration together is something that's very important for North Carolina.
The North Carolina Collaborative for Mathematics Learning is a partnership. As such, its success depends upon stakeholders from all facets of mathematics education in North Carolina. We welcome and need increased input and efforts from teachers, teacher leaders, school-based administrators, district content personnel, and others. Consider joining with us in building a partnership that believes the best of our teachers and students, leverages current successful partnerships, and builds sustainable structures so that each and every student in North Carolina receives the highest quality mathematics education possible.
Okay, so as you're looking at the video, one thing I want you to take note in, this was made specifically for high school, and this was looking at what the collaboration did together for high school, and they're planning many of these things as well coming across for elementary and middle school. And one thing I want you to notice that this collaborative is made up of people from all levels, from teachers in the classroom to coaches and district leaders and university personnel and us here at DPI as well. So this is one of the things that we want to make sure was very different about this implementation, is that we're all in this together. We're using all the resources we have across the state. All right, so instructional frameworks. This is one of the things that that NC2ML is working on, and it is currently under construction. And again, as I mentioned before, here are all the people that are working on this instructional framework. Okay, what it will do is it'll take the standards and it'll kind of clump them into units. Now I'm putting units in quotations right now because it's gonna be different. They are not creating a curriculum, but they are creating some like instructional guides. All right, it will have a suggested sequence to it, However, it's also going to allow flexibility in implementation. And that's really important because many of you out there have a curriculum that you flow by, that you work through. So this is going to be extremely flexible. Okay, and this also provides a framework for what we're going to be seeing in Canvas. And we're going to talk about Canvas in just a moment. As a matter of fact, right now. Okay, Canvas. One of the things that eventually is going to happen is that the wiki that we have all grown to love and adore is eventually going to be withdrawn and taken away. And we're going to start housing a lot of our resources into Canvas. Now again, this is in the future. This is not happening immediately, but this is happening in the future. One thing to concern is that every teacher in North Carolina will have access to all of these resources in Canvas, so nobody has to worry if your district hasn't purchased Canvas. And again, do not worry, everybody will have access to it, public schools and charter schools. Okay, now, there will be a lot more information coming about this at our spring regional meetings.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. So we're going to talk about some of the realigned resources. So while we're creating new resources to align with the new standards, there are still resources that we have available currently that we're going to continue to use. So you are going to have still access to those. They're just going to be realigned to the new standards. So some of the things that you've seen before that are going to be realigned, we are taking a look at the K-5 games, and we're going to match those to the new standards. They will also be made available as separate documents, and then also the way they are now as the comprehensive document. The formative assessment tasks from the wikis for K2 and for 3-5 are going to be realigned to the new standards, along with some new tasks that will be coming along. Then also the K-5 grade level units that were created with the previous standards, the 2010 standards, those will be folded into the lessons for learning. So they're not going to be standalone units, they're going to be lessons that will go along with lessons for learning. The K-8 vocabulary will be updated. The K-8 lessons for learning will be updated and realigned. And then the K-12 AIG lessons that we link to from our wiki will also be realigned to the new standards. So here's our timeline. Please remember that this is a tentative timeline dependent on a lot of different factors, but we're hoping to get to these dates. So already available on the wiki are the revised standards. They are, you can get to them with the left navigation bar. It says 2017 standards. The at-a-glance documents that show the major changes to the standards are there, and also the comparisons between the old and the new standards. In November at the NCCTM conference, we'll be providing updates, and we'll take a look at the instructional frameworks, and we'll be asking for feedback on those framework drafts as we move towards completion. So if you are at the conference, we'd love to see you at those sessions. Then this spring, we're planning to provide updates and PD on the new standards, MRIs, and the instructional frameworks at regional meetings and statewide conferences. All materials should be ready for implementation by June 2018. Okay, cool. So that's all I have to say. But we are going to try to answer some questions today. We've been answering them as we go along. And so hopefully if you had a question, we got it answered. But we are going to be collecting some of these other questions to put into the FAQ that Lisa told you about earlier that we can post. Also, I know some of you are having weather, so you may actually already be gone, but we are going to post the webinar. It will be on our wiki site under webinars. It will be there for elementary and secondary. We'll post the PowerPoint, our facilitation guide, and then also the recording so that you can use that for your own district. Lisa is posting the link in the chat box to the new standards. Okay, cool. Spring dates have not been set for the sessions yet. So it's not a pacing guide. We're doing instructional frameworks that are going to suggest some ways to put standards together and then sequence them. It is not a mandatory pacing, and we don't really want to call it a pacing guide. So instructional framework that is going to be used for actually K-8, and that will be coming along.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. One of the main purposes of that is help to organize our professional development and when things are released and how they are aligned across the state, because it's very difficult to match all the curriculums across the state. And so we have a couple questions here, and I'll make sure and read them out loud so you can hear them. Will Canvas replace textbooks? Not our Canvas site. That will not be, as we were saying there with the instructional frameworks, it's not a complete curriculum. What it is, they're basically kind of like unit plans to help you form your units of instruction. That'll be especially helpful to districts that don't have a set curriculum. If you have a set curriculum, it may be able to help guide what you do. Because if you think about it, most of us will put our units together in pretty closely the same manner. We got a question about, will 6-8 games be created? And the answer is not at this time. And there's some questions about where you can find the documents. The documents that Denise was talking about earlier, if you use the link that Lisa gave you there, it should have shown up there in your dialog box over there. It should take you to the page, and then on your your left-hand menu, you can click on the 2017 K-8 standards, and that will take you to the page where you can find all of the information. Okay. And by the way, that 2017, that's just saying that's when those standards were adopted, right? They will not be implemented in 2018-19. Okay. Will this affect my assessments in June of 2018? And I'll answer part of it, and I'll turn the other part to Josh. As far as your EOGs go, no, they are still under the current standards, so they will remain the same for June of 2018, which is the end of this school year.
The only effect it'll have on anyone is if you are one of the select schools to participate in the field testing. So your testing coordinator should be aware of what grade levels, if any, that school has in order to field test. The field test will not count. They're just in order for us to build the next generation of our assessments. However, it will take some instructional time, so that's how you'll be affected. But that's not everybody. That's just, it's LEA and school, depending on where you are, who you are.
Yeah, and for that, you should check with your local testing coordinator, and they should be able to tell you more information when that stuff is decided. All right, so we have a question about the check-ins. And will this instructional framework that's being created, will that affect the check-ins? And the answer to that is yes, it will. Josh, do you want to talk about that as well?
So this summer we are going to do a test specifications meeting, again, for the check-ins. We previously did one last summer and the summer before that for 5th grade and 4th and 6th grade. We will be doing that again for mathematics grades 3 through 8 to make sure the items that we have are appropriate as far as the timeline and the quantity per standard.
Okay. All right, and we had a couple of other questions. Where will the webinar be posted? And again, if you go to our wiki site and to our professional development and webinar page, they're under the webinars. They will be posted. It'll take a little bit for the video to get created from today and then to get that uploaded, but you should be looking for it within the next day or two, and it should be posted up there for you. And I had a question, what does MRI stand for again? It stands for the Math Resource for Instruction. And so, for example, if you have the 7th grade MRI, it's the 7th grade math resource for instruction. Yes, we had a question, is can you clarify the adoption implementation date for the new standards? Absolutely. The standards were adopted in June, this past June, but they will not be implemented until the 2018-19 school year. So, of course, this school year, you're still teaching the same standards that you did last year. So that is going to remain exactly the same. You'll have the EOGs that'll be the same at the end of the year, just like what Josh was telling you. So all of that, everything is still the same this year. We felt that we needed this good year and plus to get the resources ready for the implementation. We think that things were a little bit rushed in the past, and we need some time to make sure we can do things right. So you'll be hearing updates through us in the spring regional meetings in the year to talk about planning and the implementation process. So you make sure if you come to the NCCTM conference, we'll be able to talk a little bit more as we go along about when some things will be ready for you to view. But again, we didn't want to start throwing out stuff about the new standards too much right now because you're still teaching the current standards. So, so we're under a little bit of things will be coming out and giving us time to adapt. So I have a question there, how can we train our teachers if the items are not released until June? Some of those items you're going to get in draft form earlier than that. What we're saying is that June will be the final draft of everything. Everything will be finalized and ready, but you'll have some things in draft form. And the reason is that some of these resource documents are massive, they're large, and they take a lot of time to create and to edit, and also we want your feedback on them. And so that process will be taking place throughout the year. So the first time everybody should be able to get a look at those documents will be in our spring regional meetings, which are going to be in late February to early March, is when you should start really getting those documents. So the question is, will they be rolled out all at once, or will it be done one grade at a time? The State Board of Education decided that it was going to come out all at once, K-8. Now, again, unlike the past, these are not massive, you don't have massive topics moving around. So our changes are relatively small in comparison. And so what you should notice about the standards if you read them is that it should be a little bit more clear, more specific. You should understand a little bit more. There were a few topics that moved around, but not that many. I would suggest if you want to know which ones move around, go to our website, and we have documents on there right now that can tell you about the bigger changes that occurred at each grade level. I had a question here, what does MSP stand for? Those are math science partnerships, and that was a federal grant program that is actually expiring right now, but they received federal grant money to help create some resources for us to use around the state and to help for those particular areas. Okay, we're just trying to, real quick, I know it's a little pause here, but we're just trying to read through some of the questions.
In regards to the NCCTM conference, it would be during the conference, not the leadership session. So I know that the K-5 session is on Friday at 8:30 to 10 o'clock, actually. So we will be giving updates and then also talking about the instructional frameworks at that session. I think middle school is on Thursday.
Yes.
And high school.
All right, so there was a question there, what are the NC check-ins? Josh, do you want to take that?
So this is kind of a lengthy answer, so I'll try to be as brief as possible. But the NC check-ins are basically a free benchmark that test development or the accountability division at NCDPI creates. If you're interested in or want to know more about the check-ins, on the Math Wiki there is a section at the bottom left that says NC check-ins. You can click that and see more information. But they are given to LEAs or schools who volunteer. And I think that window, if it hasn't already closed for schools to sign up, is quickly approaching. So if it's something you may be interested in, you want to talk to your school and LEA testing coordinator as soon as possible.
Okay, we did have a question that said that somebody asking a question that their district has been selected for field testing, but they are doing the check-ins and they're concerned about that. If you've been selected for field testing, you still teach the current standards. Nobody needs to teach the new standards until next year. So even if your district has been selected for field testing, you just go on like you have been. So work along with it. If you're doing the check-ins and you follow that along, just follow along with the check-ins in your normal process. We had a question. I think this might have been about the update sessions at NCCTM in November. In early November, we will be having update sessions there like we do every year. But of course, we know that with the new standards rolling out, there's going to be a lot of interest to come and see what's going on. That is going to be on the Friday. I'm sorry, I don't have the calendar in front of me to know the date specifically, but it'll be the Friday of the NCCTM conference in the morning for elementary, and I believe it's in the afternoon for the middle school, and it'll be on a Thursday. And so if you are going to be at that conference, stop by those update sessions. You'll hear the most current things, the most current about the timelines, when things are coming out, and you'll also be able to be part of a feedback process to help with those documents as well. Okay, I think we're running close to our end right now. Again, if you have any questions, we're going to leave the webinar open for just a few moments. If you have any other final questions that you would like us to take note of, go ahead and put those in. Also, just remember that you can contact either Denise, Lisa, I, or Josh through our emails, and we'll be able to answer questions directly through email or give us a phone call. All right, thank you all, and have a good day.